Welcome back to Mina Cup Inside the Game, the podcast where we have real conversations with the people shaping the future of football, from grassroots to the global stage. I'm absolutely delighted to have in former Republic of Ireland international, Premier League player, number of clubs, Stephen Ward. Wardy, great to have you.
Cheers, Brownie. Thank you, mate.
Really good to see you. First of all, can you sum up your career in as well as you can in terms of the journey from Ireland to the Premier League?
I think if you would describe it within a word, I would say unique. I think most players go through their own unique journey. Mine was probably a little bit different from the so-called pathway that you'd see as the norm really in Ireland. Most lads went away sort of 15, 16 to an academy in the UK, and then hopefully developed through to the first team. Mine was a little bit different. I was over and back to the UK when I was that age, but my family, my dad in particular, was very keen for me to finish my education. He was very analytical, looked at the percentages of players that went over and actually stayed over in England and made a career. So back and forth, had a couple of offers from clubs to sign as a YT, but he was very keen for me to stay. So I stayed, finished my education. Quite strangely at that time, I don't know if you remember yourself, that the age groups changed within the UK system. So I became one of the youngest at my age group rather than being sort of mid to one of the older ones in the group. So felt like I'd sort of missed the boat on that. Signed for Bohemians in the Premier Division of Ireland at 17. So when I finished school, went straight into their first team. Had just over 2 years playing first team football, men's football, which was, looking back now, was the best thing that could happen for me in my development. And then ended up signing with Mick McCarthy at Wolves, and went over a little bit later than what other players that I've played with went over. But I think for me it was the right thing. I was more mature. I was ready to go straight into a first team. I didn't go into an academy setup or an under 21s. I was straight into first team football, and I think that gave me the grounding to go on and have the career that I had.
With that mentality side, because that is unique, isn't it? That obviously most families, or if their child gets the opportunity to go to a professional club in England, they're going to take that straight away. How hard was that for you to deal with?
Very difficult. Tough conversations with my dad. Times have fallen out. If I'm being completely honest, it was my dream to get to England, and there was a couple of Premier League clubs. There was clubs in Scotland, a couple of Championship clubs that I'd been over at and were very interested in taking me. So, yeah, it was difficult. It took me a while to get my head around it, to be honest, because as a sort of 15, 16-year-old, you think, that's it, my dream's done, my dream's over, I'm never going to get to England, because there was players I was playing against week in, week out in the sort of top tier of youth football in Dublin that were going over and were signing for clubs. I was then getting international recognition, and I was probably the only one not in the UK. But it sort of flipped a little bit, and I probably owe a lot to Kevin Doyle, actually. Kevin was similar to me. He was in the Irish League at a very young age, and he was probably the blueprint, really. He went to Reading, and I think Shane Long actually went in the same deal, but Kevin obviously was the one that hit the ground running. Went to Reading when they had that really successful season, getting promoted, and I think it opened a lot of people's eyes in the UK about what talent was in the Irish League playing, especially at a younger age. So when I initially got into Bo's team, I was in the Ireland under-19 side, so I was getting quite a lot of coverage from that, and Kevin probably, and close after him, Darryl Murphy probably paved the way then, and I think I was probably the next in line that went over. So it became quite a unique thing then that English clubs were coming and paying fees for lads in the Irish League. So it was obviously great for myself then that opportunity arose again, but also it was great for the club I was working for, because they got financial revenue from the deal. They also got a pre-season friendly against Wolves. We came back and played them pre-season, so that generated massive income from them. And from that game then, a couple of years later, I think they ended up signing Matt Doherty. So it worked out great for the club I was with. But yeah, for me, it was tough mentally. I'd seen everyone else that I was playing week in, week out against going and signing for clubs. And, in the end, I think it was the best decision that ever happened. Although it was tough at the time, and I probably wasn't my dad's biggest fan, but when I look back now, I probably don't know how I would have reacted going at such a young age away from home. I didn't really like going on trial. I enjoyed the football side, but then away from football, it was loads of downtime. It was quite rootless because everyone was trying to earn that contract, and it probably didn't fit my personality at the time. So going to Bohemians, I played with some unbelievable professionals there who had been in England, come back to the Irish League, really top players who really gave me a good ground and a good education. So when I did make that move, I was ready for it. I think I excuse me, I ended up signing on the Monday and I made my debut on the Saturday of the January window. So I was literally straight into playing first team football, which, you know, I don't think I would have been able to do going so young. I think it's a much longer journey.
There's been like many great Irish players, yourself included, that have obviously made that transition from Ireland to England. What is it that Irish football do so well, like the Stella Marises? I know there's like Everton, Sunderland used to have kind of partnerships, didn't they, with clubs over there?
Yeah, well, I think the DDSL league is what it's called. So the DDSL Premier is probably the blueprint league in Dublin. It's your Cherry Orchard, your home farms. I was a home farm for a good period of time. St Kevin's, St Joey's, Belvedere. You know, you'll see a lot have gone from Belvedere, really, really good club. The competitiveness is unbelievable. The talent there is such an amazing talent pool, and that was the norm back then. You know, obviously, you'd have a lot of scouts at your games. It was a top level of Irish football. A lot of lads from the country would end up driving up to play for these teams to be in that shop window. So yeah, there was a great link of players going over. You'd have you know, a lot of players from that league consistently going over during school breaks to go on trial with various different clubs. A little bit different now since the rules have come in with Brexit and players not being able to go from till they're 18, and it's probably hurting these clubs quite a lot now, but probably something that will benefit the country and the development of players going forward, because the actual Premier Division clubs in Ireland, so your Shamrock Rovers, your Bohemians, St Pat's, are now putting academy systems in place. So from under 14 now, there's actually an academy system where they're getting coaching from, you know, A licensed coaches, B licensed coaches. They're training a lot more, so a lot more time on the grass, which is obviously essential that you wouldn't get unless you went to England at 15. And then there's now that pathway into the Premier Division, and obviously then that becomes a revenue stream for players to, you know, one, get to England and obviously keep their development going to hopefully benefit the national team in years to come.
I mean, your journey is a little bit different, obviously, as you said, you know, to the others that came over to England, the other Irish players, but those that you know and those that you speak to, the difficulty, because I'm kind of comparing this to UAE football, so any kind of very good players that might have the opportunity to play in Europe, as an example, what would you say to parents or young players that the difficulties that you're going to potentially have by going to a new country?
Yeah, and I think you can see that at the minute with like I said about the Irish setup, you're looking at, you know, there's a new sort of wave of players going to Italy because of the EU system now. So you've seen a lot of players, you know, now going to clubs like Inter Milan, Udinese. So, but the transition into that new country, that new culture is very difficult. England and Ireland is very similar, but unless you've grown up in Ireland, England is a completely different world. It's, you know, 52 million people. Ireland's a small country of 4 million. It's very countryside, very laid back. So yeah, it is difficult. And obviously you got that, you know, you're away from home, you're away from your family, you're away from your peers, your friends, and you have to be very, very mentally strong. And that's why the percentage of people that go, out the numerous number of kids that went over at sort of 15, 16, I think the percent was probably 1% that actually stayed and made a career in the UK. So, you know, I think the funding and the investment now in the Irish League, if you look at it, you know, the crowds, the clubs are competing in Europe, there is a really good level in the Irish League. So for me, listen, everyone's different, but for me, that was the best journey for me. I think looking back now, going at 15, 16, I may have had to come back if it didn't work out, to maybe restart in the Irish League to potentially get to the UK again. I think my journey just suited me. But yeah, it's very difficult, you know, from an aspect of being a 15, 16-year-old, packing your bags, moving away from home. You know, you do have to be very mentally strong, and you know, ultimately that's why the percentages are always going to be very, very, very few that make it and actually continue to have that upward trajectory and having a career in the game.
And you must be very thankful to your dad now, considering you went on to play 50 times for your country and played in European Championships.
Yeah, no, I am. Listen, I think you know, at the time you're you know, I wasn't in a great place with him in terms of that, but you know, he was he didn't make the decision off a whim. You know, he was very close with people in the FAI. He done his research. He seen the difference of people going over without an education coming back. And ultimately, all he was looking for was, if something didn't go well, you've always got your education in your back pocket. And you know, it probably led me to do an education sort of the back end of my career, which we might speak about later. But I think I would have probably at the time, you know, really been, you know, up for going away and starting that journey at 15. But looking back now, and like I said, everyone's got a different journey. That worked for me. It worked for me going over at a later stage in my own development as a player and as a person. I was much older. I was straight into living on my own, you know, which is something that I'd never done before. You know, so I had to come out of my comfort zone. And I think football as well, you can find the right location. And I found the right club for me. Wolves are going through a transitional period. They've been in the Premier League. They dropped down to the Championship. You had players like Dennis Irwin, Paul Ince that had just left. They still had a bit of a mix of a core of these experienced lads. Jackie McNamara was there, Gary Breen, Jody Craddock. And then there was a real wave of signing lads from lesser divisions or so-called lower league teams for a cheaper price and developing them over a period of time. So, you know, you had myself come in, Kevin Foley came in from Luton, Michael Kitely from Grays, Andy Keogh came in from Scunthorpe, Matt Jarvis came in from Gillingham. So they were really building a core of players. And ultimately we had a year or two where we were building and developing, and then we got promoted to the Premier League. So I probably didn't just move at the right time. I found the right club and the right project for myself as well.
And I suppose, you know, following the footsteps really of arguably the most famous footballer in Ireland, Robbie Keane. Did you ever feel like, you know, that obviously trying to, I mean, particularly, you know, completely different positions, but obviously, did you ever feel like there was any kind of pressure on you to produce as just from an Irish perspective?
Not really, no. I think what was great was that Robbie had been at Wolves, so a few of the lads that were still in the squad had played with Robbie or grown up through through their academy system with Rob, and there was that Irish connection, and that's always great when you sign for a club. You know, you've had a young Irish lad come over and do unbelievable at Wolves and then move on. And I was, you know, you had Matt Murray was still there, the goalkeeper, Rob Edwards, who's current manager of Wolves now. He was there, so they'd all come through with Rob, so there was that connection. Then obviously they signed Andy Keogh, who was an Irish lad like myself that I'd, you know, known through the years. I was a bit older than Andy, but I knew of him because he was, you know, a very good footballer, a couple of years below me. So, and then we ended up, you know, with Mick there, Mick's connection with obviously being international manager. We ended up signing Kevin Doyle, Kevin Foley, Stephen Hunt came in. So there was always a really good connection between Wolves and Irish and Irish players.
And in terms of like when we talk about development, and it's obviously a word that gets thrown about quite a lot in football, from a positional aspect, obviously you started out as a centre midfielder when you were in Ireland, or
I was actually centre forward.
Centre forward.
I was sort of a centre forward, stroke left winger, wide player, and I actually signed. I played the first 6 months at Wolves as a centre forward, so I was actually signed originally as a centre forward, but I was quite humble to see when I signed for Wolves that there was a difference between me as a centre forward and actually lads that had come through the system there that were typical number 9s, and I was just that different type of player, defend from the front. Always wanted to sort of link the play. You know, I wasn't as probably, of course I wanted to score goals, but they were just all about in the box. They were all about being in the right position, getting a name on the score sheet. So I think it probably changed when people like Sylvain Ebanks-Blake came into the club. He'd come through from Man United, you know, had an unbelievable youth career. He just, you know, he was scoring 20, 30 goals a season. And I could just see that difference. And Mick obviously seen something in me. Start moving me back to pitch a little bit, ultimately end up at left back, and probably that decision that he made to put me as a left back probably made my career go the way it went. I don't know if I probably would have got to the heights that I've got to if I'd have stayed as a centre forward, because I probably wasn't at the level to be, you know, a Premier League striker, and ultimately moving back probably gave me that opportunity to have more years in the Premier League and obviously represent my country.
What your attributes? How would you best describe your best attributes?
I think hard work and ethic and good ethics was the first thing for me. You know, every day I trained like it was a match day. You know, always played on that edge to make sure I was doing everything right. Listen, I think, and a lot of people say I've played with many players that had so much more technical ability than me, so much more natural given talent. Not to say that I didn't have that, I did have that, but I probably got the most all the time out of my body and my talent that I could get, and that's how I looked at things. You know, if I played a game on a Saturday and the manager was picking me for the next weekend, I knew I'd done my job right. And I sort of led every week into that. So trained the way I wanted to play, making sure I was doing everything right, whether I was gym-based, eating right. Because I knew there was always someone to take your place. And I played with that edge that if you're not on it, especially at those levels where there's so many good players, you know, you can lose your shirt quite easily. So I always try to live by that mantra of, you know, take it day to day, week to week. You know, make sure whatever you do on a Saturday, as long as you perform well and you're in the team, then you've done your job right for that week, and then you restart again.
Did you have that in you from day dot, or was it something? Was it coaches that influenced you? And you know, how did you have such a good attitude and such a probably an understanding attitude? You mentioned there, Mick McCarthy obviously move you into different positions. If you're a centre forward, you have certain selfishness about you, don't you usually, but the understanding to be able to do that.
I think my probably work ethic and that come from my dad. Like, my dad was a hard grafter. He's you know, been very successful in what he done in his field, but you know, especially throughout my childhood, I didn't see him a lot because he was working double shifts. He was, you know, always drove that into me about, you know, that work ethic and making sure you're working to the best of your ability all the time. And yeah, coaches, you know, you know, once I went to England, like I said, I went to the right manager. You know, Mick was a defender. He was no nonsense. You know, you'd be a mixed team because you worked hard, you done everything right, you gave 100%. You know, you could make mistakes, and to be honest with you, if you had a bad game, he'd tell you, but he'd give you that opportunity to rectify that. So I think I was lucky enough to work with two managers really throughout my career that were very similar in terms of their values and how they see in the game, which was, you know, probably the two managers I worked with for the longest periods of my career. So Mick McCarthy and Sean Dyche, you know, very much about team, all about the team, not about the individual. You know, making sure you know, whatever you do, if you're going to lose a game, you make sure they've worked hard to beat you. And I just tried to follow that really throughout my career. And people always say you can be the right player for the right fit or the right, you know, culture of the club. You know, I always say if I went to certain clubs, would I have fit how they played, or would I have been the right player? And they were the two that obviously worked out for me.
I mean, with the Mina Cup, we're always, to be honest, trying to educate parents and in how best to bring their football up from bring their child up from a football perspective.
Yeah.
How was your parents with you when you played? You know, on a game day.
Probably different to probably how I am with my son, because my dad never played to a level, and my mum didn't obviously play. They played different sports, but yeah, from what I can remember, didn't really get involved much in terms of that. It was, you played well, but my dad would tell me if I had a bad game, he'd be open and honest. And listen, I knew myself, but nothing really from a tactical viewpoint. They just sort of let me play. But yeah, he'd give me feedback if I wasn't on or I hadn't worked hard enough, but not in a way where, you know, it was too much of an influence. I probably found that quite difficult with my own son, you know, and his pathway and him growing up to play, because I would see things probably that other people wouldn't see and I'd expect of him, or that I knew he could do but he potentially wasn't doing. So I always found that difficult, and I probably learnt as he got older just to let him be and take a step back. At the start I found that quite difficult because I was so desperate for him to show what he could do, and I knew he had talent. But then I realised I was making a mistake with that, and I thought, no, he's got to find his own way.
How did you realise that though?
Probably because I seen it in his performance. I seen him get nervous when I was watching. And he found it difficult because obviously everyone he was playing with knew I had played. You know, and he spent times at Birmingham City's academy, and he was at Burton Albion. But all his sort of peers and teammates knew that his dad had played in the Premier League, or I was still currently playing at the time. So I think he put an expectation on himself to be the best player because of that. And then his teammates always had an expectation of him to be the best player because of me. And with me then advising him, it was probably just too much for him. And I could see times he went into a shell, and I probably noticed that. I remember driving back from a game and I asked him, I said, do you like me watching you? And he openly said no.
Is that hard to take?
Yeah, very hard, yeah. And I just asked why, and he just said he felt pressure. So from that moment, I spoke to my wife about it, and I just said, I need to take a step back here. So I actually didn't go watch him for a few weeks. And then he come back to me and said, I want you to come and watch. So he then actually missed me being there, which was quite strange in a way, but I just knew I had to change the way I was around the pitch. And it wasn't like I was shouting from the sideline, because I wouldn't do that, because he was in an academy system and I let the managers, but I would give him feedback in the car, and I think he would put that much pressure on himself. And I used to watch him at times and think, right, he's not himself today because maybe I've said something to him from the last game. So yeah, it was difficult, but it was a good learning curve for me. It was a good learning curve. And, from then I just said, you go and play, go and enjoy it with a smile on your face. And it wasn't out of me thinking he was going to be a footballer or wanting to be a footballer, but it was just out of my passion for the game and knowing the game and, wanting him to do well. I never ever thought, oh, I want you to be a footballer or do that. I know from being in the game how difficult that is, and the percentages, and how small it is for how small the percentage is for you to go and have a career. But yeah, when he was younger, I did have to take a step back, and I'm glad I did, because our relationship got better. He started enjoying his football again, and yeah, I probably started enjoying watching him more then from then.
It's great to have that awareness, because to be honest, a lot of parents don't, and
Yeah.
I think that's what maybe spoils kids' careers, or not just careers, just kids playing sport. And we see that a lot, obviously, on the sidelines when we go to local leagues and stuff. And it's not the UAE; it's every country I think I've been to that causes problems.
It's the same in the UK, in Ireland, and I think it comes from, I'm one of the lucky ones that had this career, so I understand how difficult it is. I also understand how ruthless the game is. I think a lot of parents potentially don't see that, so that's why when I was pushing my son to do well, or giving him feedback, it wasn't because I want him to be a footballer. It was just because I had that notion that whatever you do in life, whether it's a job interview, whether you're playing a game of golf, you do it to your best of your ability, because it's like I used to always say to my son, if you go for a job and you don't want it as much as the next person, they'll get the job. So it that sort of way, it caters for every industry and all walks of life. So it was just more about, if you're going to play to the best of your ability. It was never to be a footballer. I think if you've not been in the situation of knowing the football industry, I think a lot of people are just potentially looking at, right, he's going to be this, we want him to be this, we want him to be a footballer. And sometimes that can have a detriment to the kids' development, because one thing that you'll have noticed from what I spoke about earlier, my journey, is kids develop at different times, different ages, different levels. The best at under 12, maybe the worst at under 18, the worst at under 12 may become the best at under 16. So it's really important to let children develop and have their own time to become the player or the person that they're going to be.
Brilliant. And from an education piece, like when you start to do your coaching qualification and then education outside of that in terms of leadership, how much has that made an imprint on you as a parent, but also as a person?
Yeah, huge. I think, and listen, society is a bit different now when you look at the different ways you can actually build a career. But for me, when I was coming to that retirement age, and you're obviously in the back of your mind what you're going to do next. So I initially started on the journey, done my UEFA A license, so the coaching side. But I had a real passion for the operational side of football and the business side. And ultimately, it was funny, I was speaking to my dad about doing a CV for sort of when I retire, and this was probably a year before I retired, but I knew it was coming. And my CV basically was my football career. And I just thought I needed a little bit more than that. So done a bit of research, spoke to a few players and managers that I'd seen had done sort of, further education. Ended up doing a master's degree in sports directorship through VSI and education, UCFB, people like yourself, Tony, and it's the best thing I've ever done. Best thing, just in terms of a different way of seeing the game and understanding football from a business perspective. Some of the guest speakers we had in really enlightened my own education and the the industries and organisations that we were able to visit, just to see how high performance worked, from a sort of a youth level all the way up, and even within different industries. So yeah, one of the best things I've done, and I always say to players, like, I would advise anyone to potentially do that if they're looking to, especially if they're not going to, the normal route is players finish to go into coaching, but if that doesn't drive them, to get some sort of education, because it's opened up a lot of doors for me, and just in terms of my network and who I'm able to pick the phone up to as well.
I suppose that helps in from an environment perspective. I mean, you're talking about obviously how you were with your son 1-to-1, but then the times in your career, your playing career, Like at what times can you remember back? You know, all the different clubs that you played at. Where did you feel was the best environment, but were the reasons why was the best environment?
Yeah, I was very lucky in terms of most of the clubs I was at. You know, the environment or the culture was great. I would say it's very difficult to differentiate between Wolves and Burnley. Obviously, I had 8 years at Wolves, nearly 7 years at Burnley. Really similar managers, very similar culture. You know, really based around the people, good people, hard work. You know, leaving everything out there on the pitch. You know, and that carried from training into match day. It's very hard to pick where was, you know, and obviously we had successful times, so that obviously helps build that culture and build that, you know, that environment. But yeah, definitely Burnley Wolves were the ones where I look at now and I go, that's the kind of culture I would want in a football club if I was to, you know, to be at the top or running one.
And then, you know, post your playing career, can you describe what happened there? What was the transition and why?
Well, firstly, when you retire, it's I think the hardest day I probably had in my whole career was the Monday morning after I retired. You sort of feel like you have no purpose, no structure. As a player, you sort of know where you're going to be pretty much every day of the year. You know, in terms of days off, times off, off season, when you can go away on holiday. And I think when I retired, I'd obviously done my education. I was finishing that, so that really gave me a purpose and a bit of, you know, I had something to get my teeth into. I then went and worked with a club as an assistant manager. Brackley Town, my friend had got the job and he just rang me out of the blue and said, listen, it's part-time, get you out of the house while you're doing education. So I'd done that for a year. And when I finished my degree, I was lucky enough to be introduced to Darrell Eales, chairman of Solihull Moors, who were in the National League. He was looking for a director of football. So over probably a 6-week period, I met with him, sort of presented about how I would like a football club to run, how I seen the day-to-day, the culture I would want to bring, the type of players I'd want to bring in. And lucky enough, he gave me the job, and I spent just over 2 years there working alongside him. Great club. And what I really enjoyed about it was it's very authentic, the National League. It's very much about the people, the community. Obviously, playing in the Premier League is amazing, but they are, you know, worldwide organisations, like global fan base. You know, it's everywhere, different types of people. Whereas going back to that level was a great eye opener to that football pyramid in England, and how vital it is, and how brilliant some of the clubs are at that level.
And you're now here in the UAE. It's been a year now, is it?
Just under a year, yeah. Just under a year, yeah.
You've come in as head of football development
at
the Irish Football Club. I know the Irish Football Club very well from me first coming out here. They're the best community-based football club that's then become a professional football club, which must be, you know, the things you've just talked about there, being at Solihull Moors and all the experiences that you've had from your playing career. You've got a great opportunity here, haven't you?
Yeah, brilliant. I have to say, I'm really, really enjoying it. I think how it came about, obviously, it was sort of coming to the back end of my second season at Solihull. I'd always sort of promised the family that when I retired, we would try something different, potentially move abroad and see how we got on. So obviously very got a network that's similar to Sean, so know quite a few people that he would know. Had a conversation with Sean, came over in the May, sat down with him, told me everything about the club, met Tony as well. And I just really liked the project. It really appealed to me. I just thought there was, you know, so much scope for this to scale and get bigger. And now being in the midst of it, I can see exactly why. You know, great infrastructure, great people. You know, really, really good community. You know, caters for football for all. And obviously we've got that pro side now, which is hopefully going to help the club move on and really develop over the next few years.
In terms of similarities, I'm going to ask similarities and differences from what you've seen from the football here, obviously, to England and coming through in Ireland. First of all, what are the similarities you can see?
I think how big the game is. It probably surprised me how big the actual game was within the region. You know, you can go out any night of the week and there's kids training, there's football tournaments on. You know, there's some really good facilities. But yeah, I probably was surprised at how big the game was within the region, how many people played, whether that's on an amateur basis. You know, look at the amateur leagues here, then you got the pro leagues. And it was actually really good to see, you know, even in the youth level, the amount of private academies, the amount of clubs offering football for these kids, you know, full to the brim every week, you know, really good football at the weekend. You got your National League academies. So for me, yeah, very similar to how you'd see it in the UK or Ireland. Like a lot of academies, a lot of teams. You know, there's games on back to back on a Saturday, Sunday, which is similar to the UK. So yeah, it was actually really, really good to see that.
And in terms of, this is a very broad question, but like differences between the two. Obviously, here it's not the Premier League; it's completely different. But the differences where there are, but where you can where the improvements need to be made. Where would you say they are here?
It's probably it's a difficult question. People have asked me as well, what do I see the standard of the pro level here compared to the UK? But it's a very different game. There's a lot more variable elements here in terms of the heat, different, probably more international players here than maybe, you know, especially in the lower leagues in the UK. But I think from an infrastructural base, I think they're getting there in terms of more facilities to play. You look at the new Jebel Ali, you know, resort now that I know the Mina Cup has used so well in the past. But you look at, I think, yeah, if you're looking at infrastructure wise, I think a lot of clubs are having to rent venues. There's not many with their own venue, which is probably something that you'd see a lot in the UK, even at a grassroots level. Most clubs have got their own facility, clubhouse. So from that point of view, there's probably differences there. I think in terms of the pro level, yeah, probably similar. There's probably not enough stadiums or grounds where, you know, people could have use or internal use for themselves. So, but I do think there's so much scope for it to keep improving and get there. Obviously, it takes an influx of investment, which, you know, they probably find difficult here in terms of, you know, getting people to games, especially at the pro level. You know, how can they market that? Maybe potentially, you know, there's certain rules that you have to abide by here in terms of the locality of players or local players, which I think is brilliant in terms of bringing the game forward here. But would there be, you know, potentially a little bit more interest at that level if there was a few more international or more spaces for international players? Because, you know, for me as a professional lawyer, if there had been an opportunity for me to come out here and apply my trade at some stage, you know, especially with lifestyle and how it is over here, I think it could become a real pathway for players from the UK or Europe to come out here and continue their journey. So is that something that potentially could change it? I'm not sure, but yeah, there's definitely, I would say it's developing nicely, but there's probably a lot more development infrastructure wise that it can probably push on even more.
And from a Mina Cup perspective, when you were a young player in Ireland, what tournaments did you play in?
So obviously the Milk Cup, we used to go to the Ian Rush tournament over in Wales, I think it was, just ones off the top of my head. And we used to go to you know, we'd go to, I think we went to Leicester City one time and had an in-house tournament there with a few local clubs and obviously Leicester being the sort of the catchment. But these are unbelievable opportunities for kids. I think, you know, Irish clubs would always predominantly go to the UK or to tournaments down the country in Ireland, but, you know, to have the opportunity to come over here and play in such an international tournament is an unbelievable experience for, you know, kids at their age. Not just from a football perspective, just from a character building, you know, life experience, and just a really good experience in general.
I mean, we both thankfully played in the Milk Cup as young kids and had a, you know, incredible experience. And from that aspect, what are the best parts that you remember, most enjoyable times playing in the tournaments? Being
with your mates away from home. You know, obviously your parents would be up there, but they wouldn't be around you all the time. You'd stay on camp with your teammates. And I think just that, I think them times away, playing against different teams, spending times with other teams, I thought that was always great, interacting with teams from different countries, you know, different cultures, you know, getting to know them. I just thought, all in all, the experience was amazing. But I think to have the opportunity to come somewhere like here and, you know, Mina Cup, you know, in the past has had clubs from all over the world, like probably the most international one I've seen, where you're getting different types of clubs from everywhere around the world. I just think what an experience for kids, and I know some of the clubs that have come here from the UK have had unbelievable experience. I know Wolves are here, don't know if it was last year or the year before, but I know some of the coaches that came, and even from a coach's perspective, I think for them it was great because they were pitting their teams against completely different styles of play, completely different profiles of players. So yeah, massively positive. But from a young lad's point of view, for them to get that opportunity to go away as a group, have that maturity of feeling away from home, being with your coach, being with your teammates, interacting with kids from all over the world. What an opportunity and what a time and experience they could have.
We're going to do a little fun challenge here.
Well,
Finish the sentence, it's called. And biggest mistake young players make?
I would say putting too much pressure on themselves.
Biggest mistake youth coaches make?
Making it all about winning.
Biggest mistake parents can make?
I'd probably go with putting too much pressure on the kids as well.
The players who usually go furthest are the ones who
develop at their own pace.
A tournament becomes valuable when?
Oh, it's a good question, that. Well, I think they're invaluable for a kid's development and growth aspect from as a character. I think, yeah, I just think that from an experience point of view and given young players the opportunity to see what it's like going to a tournament that you may do as an older professional.
A coach loses his players when?
When he's too hard on them.
If you could give one piece of advice to a 14-year-old player, what would it be?
Be patient and enjoy every time you're on the grass.
So these are Mina Cup related questions now. Obviously, being involved with Dubai Irish, you take part in the Mina Cup,
yep.
and have been a great supporter of ours as well. How important is it for Dubai Irish to do well in the Mina Cup?
I think it's more important for them to be involved in it. So in terms of qualifying and making sure that we are relevant and seen at the Cup. In terms of how important it is for us to do well, I think that's probably the least important thing for me. I think it's about going and competing, showing what the club's about. Obviously, we want to do well, not to take away that we're not going in to do well. But I think giving kids the opportunity to play against so-called bigger clubs from different parts of the world, I think is more valuable for me, more key for me. Listen, of course, everyone wants to do well, but I don't think that should be our main driver in terms of...
It's more about developing the players.
And going and having this opportunity and experience of playing against all these players, and being part of and I've openly said this to you before, this for me is one of the biggest international youth tournaments I've ever seen. The way it's run, how big it is, how it looks like a World Cup for kids. The opening ceremony, everything that goes on in the round. What an experience for kids, and we would just want our players to be part of that, and then go and play to the best of your ability and see where it takes us. From
a UAE football perspective, from what you've seen, I appreciate it's almost a year now. The standards, because the standards that you've been used to as a player, and then obviously later on in your career in senior positions, where do you think that we can improve? How can we improve football here?
Yeah, I think one of the things where it's difficult as well, and this is probably the same in most countries really, is bridging that gap between youth football and senior football. And I know within the sort of pro system there is sort of 19s, 23s, but there's probably not enough teams to cater for all the players coming out at 16, 17 level. Obviously we got the amateur leagues here, but if there was a way of some leagues coming in where there was sort of elite ones and the better players at that level could continue their journey, into sort of 19s, 21s, I don't know, I'm off the top of my head, there's a 14 or 15 teams in the actual pro league. You think about the pyramid down to the third division. There's not that many pro clubs where there's going to be enough 19s, 21s teams to cater for all these players.
So it's pathways really through from those kids, from those locals and expats that obviously come and play in the private academies into the professional clubs, and it's just creating pathways.
And creating a bit of a bridge. Because a lot, and this isn't just in the UAE, I find this all over the world, that age group is the most difficult age group to keep them engaged. Once they start getting 16, 17, 18, there's different factors in their life. There's obviously a lot to do in the region. They become they're growing up, they want to start going out doing stuff. So how can you keep these better players involved in the game where they can continue that pathway, and they might end up at an Al Jazeera or, you know, a Shabab in a year or two's time, but where's that bridge or that pathway really to keep them developing, keep the coaching right, and giving them that opportunity to potentially become a player within the pro setup.
Right, quick fire ones now. So these are quick. We've got to answer these nice and sharp. One quality every young player must have.
Technical ability.
One quality every coach must have.
Patience.
Most underrated part of player development.
Human element.
Most overrated part of player development. What's the too much focus on?
Size.
One word that describes the future of youth football in the UAE.
I would just say progressive.
Biggest red flag in a coach.
Wanting to win.
Harder to build, confidence or discipline?
Confidence.
Closing question. What is one message you'd like to leave with players, coaches and parents from your experience in the game?
From a youth perspective, I would say, focus more on development. Development of the player from an ability standpoint, technical standpoint. And I do talk a lot about the human side of the game because everyone's different. Everyone's got a different personality. And for me, each individual will always develop at a different pace. So don't judge one against the other. Give them that time to develop into who they're going to be. And just enjoyment. The biggest thing for me, I always played my best football when I was out there enjoying it. So, yeah, that's what I would leave it with.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for joining us on Mina Cup Inside the Game. Really appreciate it, Wardy.
No worries, Brownie.
Top man.